Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, we are from group 7. We're gonna discuss about assessing young learners. And group 7 consists of Cinthya, Kesuma, Adistana, Gina, Ahsana, Fitri, and Nesia Alvida. Alright, the first material will be delivered by me, Gina, Ahsana, Fitri. Okay, before we talk about how to assess young learners, it's better for us to know what is assessment or assessing. So, according to Brainly, assessment differs from evaluation. It can be useful to look at the distinction between the two. Assessment refers to collecting information and making judgments on a learner's knowledge, whereas evaluation is used when collecting and interpreting information for making decisions about the effectiveness of an education program. In brief, we can say that an assessment is the gathering of information for a specific purpose. And the difference between assessment and evaluation, if it is assessment, looks at what individual or groups of learners can do, while evaluation concerns on an entire education program and not just specific learners. And the second, we have the emphasis should be on the skills and knowledge that students have acquired. So, when we assess the students, it's better to measure the skills that they have had and try to help them to improve it, rather than measure the skills or the material that they don't know. And the third, there are two important concepts in discussing assessment. They are validity and reliability. Since assessment is measuring the skill of English, so validity and reliability come to be the important tools to help the teacher. When looking to see if an assessment activity is valid, we need to look at what the activity and what it is supposed to be measured. For example, we can see the left side of the screen. It's the example of valid assessment. For instance, learners put all of the pictures that start with the T sound together. It means the skill that will be assessed is phonemic awareness. And the second, learners match a written word with the picture. The skills that will be assessed is reading, or it can be also vocabulary. The third, learners listen to a story and then answer the comprehension question. The skill that will be assessed is listening comprehension. And the teacher usually use assessment to determine how well the students are doing. Next, there is background to assessing young learners. Beyond validity and reliability, there are a number of additional considerations you should take into account before choosing an assessment tool to use with young learners. The first, reasonable expectation. Don't expect children to have better skills in English than they possess in native language, because as it is known that students are usually dominated by their native language. So, make sure that your assessment tool should reflect the time needed to learn the language itself. And the second, wait time. It is the amount of time that the teacher waits for a learner to respond. For instance, when we explain something to the students, it's better for us to give them 5 to 10 minutes for them to understand what we talk about. Avoid explain continuously, because we don't know whether the students can understand or get what we mean about the material that we convey to them. And the third, we have transitioning into English. Before giving an English language assessment, they need time to transition into English. So what we get of transitioning into English and the statement is, before we assess the students, let them understand the language, what the assessment what the assessment is by transitioning their native language into English or vice versa. The fourth, instruction to learners. It should have instructions which are easy to understand. As it is also stated by Cameron that it is important to have clear instruction so that the teacher can assess whether the goals have been met. For example, you can see the right side of the screen. There is an example of good and poor instruction. For example, look at the list of vocabulary items and circle the corresponding letter of the item which doesn't belong. Note that one word is dissimilar. And the example for good instruction is look at the list of words. One word doesn't belong. Circle the letter of the word. Circle the letter of the word that doesn't belong. And the sample item is A. Cat, B. Bird, C. House, D. Fish. The instruction is actually same, but as a teacher, we have to select the easiest language to be used to instruct the students. And the last, we have talking to strangers. Children are usually taught not to speak to strangers. However, in some cases, there are situations when an English language test is given by someone who is unfamiliar because it will practice them to be more confident in speaking English. Next, we have formal assessment. In most countries, the elementary school students are required to participate in mandated formal assessment. This type of assessment may be administered on a one-to-one basis or given to a group of young learners in the form of written tests. So there are two instruments which can be used in formal assessment. The first is ESL Language Proficiency Instruments and the second is Cambridge Young Learner Assessment. ESL Language Proficiency Instruments. The instrument focuses on someone's speaking skill. It usually requires someone to administer the speaking portion of the test. So this test will determine students whether they need extra help learning English at school because they come from a place where English is not the primary language. And the second, we have Cambridge Young Learner Assessment. This instrument comes to be the well-known test in recent years. This test helps to assure a high level of validity and reliability of the test. Well, I think it's enough for me. The next explanation will be delivered by Cinthya Kesuma Adistana.
Okay, for the next is about classroom-based assessment, which in many oral and written language activities can easily be used from classroom-based assessment. Most teaching activities can be used for assessment when there is criteria, including an aim as well as a feedback mechanism. Now, before using an activity as an assessment tool, it is important to determine what type of assessment information it. For instance, children may do an activity sheet where they answer questions about the story. Based on the children's answers, you can determine how well they have comprehended the story. And we will look at instructional activities which it will help you to assess your students' progress in the four main language skill: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And in here we will also look at using portfolios as assessment tools. Jadi di sini penjelasannya, banyak aktivitas bahasa lisan dan tulisan yang dapat digunakan dengan mudah gitu untuk penilaian berbasis kelas. Jadi kadang sebagian besar kegiatan pengajaran itu dapat kita gunakan untuk penilaian jikanya kita ada kriteria termasuk tujuannya apa serta mekanisme umpan balik, memberikan feedback gitu kepada si siswa itu. Jadi sebelum kita mengaplikasikan suatu kegiatan atau melakukan suatu kegiatan sebagai alat penilaian, ini sangat penting untuk menentukan jenis informasi penilaiannya seperti apa. Jadi contohnya, anak-anak dapat mengerjakan lembar kegiatan di mana mereka menjawab pertanyaan tentang sebuah cerita misalnya. Jadi berdasarkan jawaban dari si anak-anak, kita nih bisa gitu untuk menentukan seberapa baik sih mereka memahami cerita tersebut, dan kita akan melihat aktivitas instruksional yang akan membantu kita gitu dalam menilai kemajuan siswa kita dalam 4 keterampilan bahasa utama seperti mendengarkan, berbicara, membaca, menulis. Dan di sini juga akan ada pembahasan mengenai penggunaan portofolio sebagai alat penilaian yang akan mendapatkan yang akan memberikan lah, sehingga kita dapat mendapatkan keuntungan dari aktivitas-aktivitas yang dilaksanakan seperti itu.
Alright, about listening skills. So there are two main components of listening assessment in the young learner classroom. The first is the assessment of phonemic awareness, the ability to distinguish between different sounds. The importance of phonemic awareness was discussed in chapter 2. And the second component of listening assessment is listening comprehension, which was also discussed in chapter 2. A number of different aspects of phonemic awareness can be assessed. These include the ability to distinguish between sounds, identify words that start or end with the same sound, and recognize rhyming words. Jadi ada dua komponen utama dari penilaian untuk listening, untuk mendengarkan di kelas pelajar muda, pelajar yang learner. Jadi yang pertama adalah penilaian kesadaran fonemik atau kemampuan untuk membedakan suara yang berbeda. Dan yang kedua, penilaian mendengarkan adalah pemahaman si anak ini ketika mendengarkan, yang sudah kita bahas sama-sama di bab 2 sebelumnya oleh grup yang sebelumnya udah maju. So, sejumlah aspek berbeda dari kesadaran fonemik itu dapat dinilai gitu. Nah, ini tuh juga termasuk kemampuan untuk membedakan suara, kemudian mengidentifikasi kata yang dimulai atau diakhiri dengan suara yang sama, dan bisa juga mengenali kata-kata yang berrima gitu. Nah, untuk kita menerapkannya itu, kita bisa menggunakan salah satu cara seperti berikut ini. Ketika kita menilai kesadaran fonemik, kita tuh dapat memberi anak itu lembar penilaian kesadaran fonemik yang sederhana. Contohnya seperti misalnya kita meminta anak-anak itu untuk melingkari wajah yang happy. Kita tuh kasih ada dua pilihan, ada gambar wajah yang happy sama wajah yang sedih kayak gitu kan. Nah, jadi ketika si anak ini mendengar suara yang berbeda, maka dia akan memberikan atau melingkari wajah yang sedih or sad. Tapi kalau misalkan dia dengar yang apa yang dia dengar itu sama kayak gitu suaranya, dia akan melingkari wajah yang happy tadi. Jadi inti dari kegiatan ini sebenarnya bukanlah untuk menilai kosakata, tetapi lebih pada bagaimana sih anak-anak dapat membedakan suara. Nah, jadi kalau kita menggunakan lembar kerja yang sama, kita dapat dengan mudah menggunakan pasangan kata yang berbeda untuk menilai apakah anak-anak ini dapat gitu loh mengetahui kata-kata itu berbeda apa enggak kayak gitu. And then when assessing listening comprehension, make sure that our learners understand the individual words, instructions, and piece of text. When assessing if children understand a specific word or phrase, ask them to point to an object or picture. For example, if you want to assess if a child comprehends the names of fruit, you could place picture of fruit on a table and say, please point to the banana,
please point to an apple or something like that. So if you ask your learner to point to a written word instead, you will be assessing both their listening and reading comprehension. Jadi ketika kita menilai listening ini, kita harus bisa memastikan bahwa si siswa kita itu memahami kata-kata, instruksi, dan potongan teks secara individu kayak gitu. Jadi ketika kita menilai anak-anak itu, misalnya nih, contohnya kita mau menilai anak-anak itu memahami kata atau frasa tertentu. Jadi kita bisa meminta mereka untuk menunjuk ke sebuah benda atau gambar. Contohnya kayak tadi, ketika kita ingin menilai si anak ini memahami nama-nama buah misalnya. Nah, kita bisa meletakkan gambar-gambar buah-buahan dan kita bisa meminta si anak misalnya, tolong dong tunjuk yang mana sih pisang, yang mana apel dan sebagainya, seperti itu. Nah, kalau yang kita mau menilai peserta didik menunjuk kata-kata yang dengan secara yang tertulis, di situ berarti kita akan menilai baik pemahaman mereka ketika mendengarkan, ketika menyimak, dan cara mereka dan pemahaman mereka ketika membacanya juga kayak gitu. About speaking skills. Speaking skills can be assessed by asking young learners questions and engaging them in conversations. So we can assess students by asking specific questions during class, as well as by talking with them on a one-to-one basis. So when assessing learners' oral skills, we may want to use an analytical or holistic rubric. For example, in there will contain about comprehension, fluency, vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar. Jadi keterampilan berbicara dapat dinilai dengan kita mengajukan pertanyaan kepada pelajar muda, melibatkan mereka dalam percakapan. Jadi kita bisa menilai siswa itu dengan mengajukan pertanyaan yang spesifik selama kelas berlangsung, dan kita juga bisa berbicara dengan mereka secara empat mata. Jadi saat kita mencoba untuk menilai keterampilan lisan peserta didik, kita bisa menggunakan rubrik analitis atau holistik yang berisi yang berisi comprehension, fluency, vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar. Jadi ketika kita melakukan conversation, kita bisa menilai kelima hal tersebut kepada anak yang akan kita ajar atau yang akan kita didik nantinya. Alright, so about assessing reading skills. So, assessing students' literacy skill is a complex process based on Harley and Tina Zero. It is especially difficult when students are learning ESL or EFL. In addition to assessing if students can decode, sound out, or pronounce the words, we will also want to assess their ability to comprehend written text. So, comprehension question can be used to determine if children understand a specific reading passage. Other techniques can also be used. One very effective technique is a story map, a graphic summary of a story. A story map can help me and can help you determine if students understand the main ideas of stories. Two of the most common story maps are the story elements map and the sequence of events story map. For a story element map, children are asked to describe the different parts or elements of a story. Specifically, young learners are asked to describe setting and characters. So, learner can also be asked to describe the conflict and resolution when using a story element map. And then jadinya ketika untuk menilai keterampilan yang satu ini cukup sulit gitu, Karena kita selain menilai apakah siswa dapat memecahkan kode, membunyikannya, atau mengucapkan kata-kata, kita juga perlu menilai kemampuan si siswa untuk memahami teks yang tertulis itu. Apakah dia sudah paham, apakah si siswa ini mengerti, atau sekadar lalu saja. Nah, jadi pertanyaan pemahaman ini untuk keterampilan reading ini dapat kita gunakan untuk menentukan apakah si anak-anak ini paham apa enggak sih sama bagian bacaan tertentu. Nah, jadi kita bisa menggunakan salah satu teknik yang efektif dengan cara melalui peta cerita ringkasan grafis dari sebuah cerita. Contohnya, jadi nanti dalam peta cerita ini kita dapat membantu siswa itu untuk memahami gagasan utama dari si cerita ini kayak gitu. Jadi yang paling umum dari peta cerita itu adalah peta elemen cerita dan peta cerita urutan peristiwa. Artinya kalau dalam peta elemen cerita, anak-anak nanti diminta untuk mendeskripsikan bagian atau cerita yang berbeda, khususnya diminta untuk mendeskripsikan latar dan karakternya. Dan yang kedua nanti untuk cerita urutan dalam peta cerita urutan peristiwa, nanti peserta didik itu akan menggambarkan konflik gitu loh, dan penyelesaiannya seperti apa, sehingga si anak-anak ini nantinya gak kebingungan gitu, dan mereka dapat memahami bagaimana sih maksudnya dan apa sih maksud dari si cerita ini kayak gitu. And the next is about writing assessment. So writing is essays by eliciting and examining a sample of writing. The learners can write a sample consisting of a sentence, paragraph, or essay. The sample can be fiction or non-fiction and can be assessed using an analytic or a holistic rubric. Just as with speaking assessment, an analytic score is broken down into categories and a holistic score is an overall score. However, the categories for an analytic writing assessment are slightly different from the categories that are used with an analytic speaking rubric. So, ada rubrik yang bisa dipakai. Writing assessment system, the first ideas, and then organization, and then voice, word choice, sentence fluency, convention, and presentation. So menulis ini dinilai dengan cara memunculkan dan memeriksa sampel tulisan dari si siswa. Jadi si siswa ini dapat menulis contoh yang terdiri dari kalimat, paragraf, atau karangan dia secara individu, karangan secara pribadi, dan sampelnya ini bisa berupa fiksi atau non fiksi. Dan kita dapat menilai menggunakan rubrik yang berisikan beberapa hal yang sudah saya sebutkan tadi. Dan sama seperti penilaian berbicara juga, skor analitik ini dipecah menjadi beberapa kategori, dan skor holistik adalah skor keseluruhan. Jadi seperti yang saya sudah sebutkan tadi, nanti kita akan bisa menilai ideasnya seperti apa, kemudian organization, voice, word choice, pemilihan katanya, kemudian bagaimana sentence fluency, convention, and bagaimana presentationnya, seperti itu. Okay, for the last one, portfolio assessment. So, portfolio assessment documents what a student can do. Portfolios can also be used to help children document for themselves what they know and can do. So, there are many different types of items that can be placed in a portfolio. This include examples of student writing, activity sheets, audio recordings of the student speaking or reading orally, and projects. When using a portfolio, be sure to date each item. It is often useful to teach our students how to select item for their portfolio. So CILT, or the Center for Information on Language Teaching and Research, has portfolio guidelines for children learning second or foreign language. So according to the guidelines, some of the portfolio pieces are self-assessment and are designed to help learners document what they are able to do with languages. Teachers are able to use this information as part of their overall assessment. So as we can see, CILT provides very specific guidelines which are both child-centered and teacher-friendly. Jadi penilaian portofolio itu bisa dikatakan sebagai mendokumentasikan apa sih yang dapat dilakukan oleh siswa. Dan portofolio ini sendiri dapat digunakan untuk membantu anak-anak mendokumentasikan sendiri apa sih yang mereka ketahui dan apa yang sudah mereka lakukan, dan selama pembelajaran itu apa sih yang dapat dilakukan, seperti itu. Ada banyak jenis barang yang bisa ditempatkan dalam portofolio. Maksudnya adalah ada berbagai hal-hal yang mencakup seperti contoh tulisan siswa, misalnya nih kayak writing assessment tadi, kan kita meminta siswa untuk menulis sesuatu, kemudian lembar kegiatan apa saja sih kegiatan yang udah mereka lakukan, lalu rekaman audio siswa ketika sedang berbicara atau membaca secara lisan, dan proyek-proyek tertentu dalam berbagai kegiatan. Nah, ini kan menjadi satu di dalam portofolio. Itu yang artinya kenapa ada banyak jenis barang yang bisa ditempatkan dalam portofolio, karena dalam satu portofolio itu bisa mencakup semuanya kayak gitu, termasuk tulisan siswa, lembar kegiatan, rekaman audio, dan sebagainya. Jadi ketika kita menggunakan portofolio atau menerapkan portofolio ini, pastikan kita ini memberi tanggal pada setiap itemnya. Jadi kan tidak maksudnya itu siswa juga tidak mengalami kesusahan, dan kita juga bisa ingat, oh di tanggal segini kita ada kegiatan ini. Jadi kan kalau bisa ada yang keliru, kita juga bisa untuk memberikan feedback seperti itu. Dan juga hal ini berguna untuk mengajar siswa bagaimana sih cara memilih item untuk portofolio mereka. Nah, dan juga Pusat Informasi Pengajaran dan Penelitian Bahasa atau CILT tadi memiliki pedoman portofolio untuk anak-anak yang belajar bahasa kedua atau bahasa asing. Jadi menurut pedoman itu ada beberapa bagian portofolio yang merupakan penilaian diri dan dirancang untuk membantu pelajar mendokumentasikan apa yang dapat mereka lakukan dengan bahasa yang telah dipelajari. Dan guru pun akhirnya bisa mendapatkan informasi sebagai bagian dari penilaian kepada siswa-siswa secara keseluruhan. Dan seperti yang kita juga sudah baca, sudah kita dengar dan kita perhatikan, CILT ini juga memberikan pedoman yang spesifik gitu, yang berpusat kepada anak dan guru. Jadi tidak hanya satu sisi saja, tapi dari pihak pengajar ataupun yang dididik juga mendapatkan pedoman yang sangat membantu seperti itu. Okay, so I think that's all from me. Thank you for your attention, and the next will be explained by my friend Nesia Alvida.
Okay, thank you, Cinthya. I will present the next material. It is about assessing in the classroom. Assessing listening comprehension. The purpose of this section is to show you the concepts and techniques discussed in the chapter. Children coursebook often have 1 or 2 assessment pages at the end of each unit. The focus is often on listening, since it is easier to assess receptive skill like listening or reading than productive skill like speaking or writing when dealing with groups of listeners. Look at to this picture. This coursebook designed for 9 and 10 years old children. The coursebook is about gorillas. Some questions that you could ask to assess child's listening comprehension. There are three questions. Number 1 is literal or explicit question. Number 2 is higher order thinking question, and the last one is vocabulary question. For literal or explicit questions, you can ask student like, what do you call the leader? And the answer is an adult male called a silverback. Who likes company? And the answer is gorillas. And for higher order thinking questions, you can ask the student like, why do gorillas live in group? And the answer, they like being with each other. What did you learn about gorillas living in group? And the answer is, some live in small group and others live in large groups. The leader is an adult male with silver hair. And for vocabulary question, what does the word company mean in the sentence, they like company? And the answer is, they like to be together. Assessing speaking skills. Some coursebook pages can easily be used to assess young learners' speaking skill on an individual basis. This is an example from Kinder Steps book. It is designed for 4 years old without any English language literary skill because it is speaking skill. You can see in the right side. Next, in conversation 1, the teacher starts the conversation by referring to the picture above. She uses the picture as a starting off point for a conversation about how the child likes to play outside. The teacher is assessing if the learner could use the present continuous as well the present tense. The teacher is able to ascertain that her student could use both construction correctly in a conversation format. You can see in the right side. Next, portfolio assessment. The portfolio items in the picture on the right demonstrate a child's sense of their own speaking skills. Next, the picture on the left is an example of an exchange between a teacher and a student. Okay, the conclusion of our material. Assessment is becoming more and more prominent in both ESL and EFL programs. As a teacher, it is something that you will be called to do on a continual basis. The purpose of the chapter was to explore language assessment as it relates to young learners. Issues impacting assessment were discussed. Strategies and techniques for assessing listening, speaking, reading, and writing were presented as well as portfolios as part of an overall program. Next, thank you so much for your attention. And a question for group 7, we have 3 questions. Question number 1 from group 1, how to do an assessment on reading comprehension skill if students are very different from one another in capturing the subject matter. So what is the most important thing to do when we want to access reading, and what are the consequences if we forget to do that thing? Well, we will answer the question number 1 from group 1. It is about how to assess reading comprehension skill if students are very different from one another in capturing the subject matter, and what is the most important thing to do when we want to access reading, and then what are the consequences if we forgot to do that thing. Alright. Basically, although the students are not different from one another, it is a little bit difficult indeed to access reading skill As it is said by Harley and Tina Jero that assessing students' literacy skills is a complex process. So that the most important thing to do is to assess reading skill is giving them comprehend written text or comprehension questions, because it can help the teacher to determine if children understand a specific reading passage. There is also one effective technique in assessing reading skill. It is a graphic summary of a story known as story map. This technique can help the student to know whether the student understands the main idea or not, and the consequences if we are not doing it. Of course, it will make the teacher difficult to assess the students. The teacher will get difficulties in determining the children's understanding about a passage and the main idea either. And question number 2 from group 5. How can teacher assess young learners when learning in this pandemic situation? In the pandemic era, there are differences compared to normal schools. Now, assessing young learners in a pandemic is not easy, but nowadays children or young learners are the millennial generations, so that we can access them using gadgets, social media, and approach at least through their parents. If young learners haven't got permission to use gadget freely, now on average, young learners also have access and facilities for gadgets, and we can provide materials, teaching materials, and so on through that. And for the last one, from group 6, if there is one student in the class who has slower learning abilities than most students his age, do we do the same assessment standard as other children or not? Because getting a low score can make students mentally down and lose their enthusiasm for learning, while discriminating in assessing can be considered unfair for other students. Okay, yes, we think we do the same assessment standard as other students, but we still think of the student as a special student who needs more effort from the teacher. We don't have to give the student bad grades. He's still learning, right? We also need to provide a lot of motivation and provide a simpler and more gradual method of repeating the material continually. And we don't have to force students to compete with other students who have higher abilities. That's all. Thank you for your attention. Assalamualaikum.